testimony and the public hearing on Substitute House Bill 1715, and we've already closed the hearing on Substitute House Bill 1766, and ask that we get a staff briefing on Substitute House Bill 1389. Ms. Van Horn and Ms. Vasic, did I pronounce that correctly?
Vasic, thank you.
Vasic, thank you.
Thank you, Chair, members of the committee. Audrey Vasic, staff to the Housing Committee. Substitute House Bill 1389 is related to residential rent increases. There is a proposed second substitute available offered by Representative Macri. Should I brief the proposed second substitute?
I'm sorry, I missed a question. You asked the
Would you like me to
substitute?
brief the proposed second substitute?
Yes, on the proposed substitute. Thanks, Ms. Vasic. Sorry, I wasn't paying attention.
Well, that's okay. So at a high level, the proposed second substitute prohibits a landlord from increasing the rent for residential tenancies, including manufactured and mobile homes, during any 12-month period in an amount greater than the rate of inflation as measured by the Consumer Price Index, or 3%, whichever is greater, up to a maximum of 7%. This rent increase limit is required to be calculated and published annually by the Department of Commerce. The bill also prohibits a landlord from charging move-in fees and deposits that exceed 1 month's rent, or from charging a higher rent or including conditions in a rental agreement that are more burdensome for month-to-month tenancies than for longer-term tenancies, or vice versa. There are exemptions from the rent increase limit for buildings less than 12 years old, tenancies in certain properties subject to affordable housing requirements, when the landlord has paid for certain improvements to the property, when the landlord is experiencing significant hardship based on sudden and unexpected cost increases as determined by the Department of Commerce, when the landlord's rental property is located in a geographic area where emergencies contribute to significant cost increases as identified by Commerce through rule, and finally, when the landlord participates in the bank capacity program administered by Commerce. A landlord is also required to provide annual notice to tenants regarding rent increases, and the Attorney General is authorized to investigate violations of the bill, issue cease and desist letters, and bring enforcement actions. The bill also creates a private right of action for a tenant to sue a landlord to recover damages, and makes violations of certain provisions in the bill also violations of the Consumer Protection Act. With that, I'll pass it over to Jessica.
Good evening, committee members. For the record, Jessica Van Horn, staff to this committee. A fiscal note has been requested but is not yet available for the proposed second substitute. There are elements in the proposed second substitute that are similar to the substitute House Bill 1389, as well as elements in substitute House Bill 1388. As such, I will be drawing from the fiscal notes for both those bills to provide an estimate of the costs under the proposed second substitute. The first set of cost-driving provisions are the sections of the bill that allow the Attorney General's office to investigate practices, issue cease and desist letters, and otherwise conduct enforcement of the provisions that would prevent a landlord from raising rents above the maximum annual rent increase as calculated by Commerce. Violations of these new limits would also be made violations of the Consumer Protection Act. These provisions are substantively similar to those included in substitute House Bill 1388. The Attorney General's office estimated it would cost $3.8 million general fund state in 23-25, $2.9 million in 25-27, and $1.9 million in 27-29 for the Consumer Protection Division to conduct investigations and other enforcement actions under substitute House Bill 1388. We would assume similar costs would be incurred under the proposed second substitute. The other set of cost-driving provisions are for the Department of Commerce to calculate the annual maximum allowable rent increase and to administer several exemptions to the limits on rent increases. The proposed second substitute includes several exemptions that were also included in substitute House Bill 1389, including the hardship exemption and the exemption for participants in the banked capacity program. Commerce estimated it would cost $2.3 million general fund state in 23-25 and $3.3 million per biennium thereafter to calculate the maximum allowable rent increase each year, to conduct rulemaking, and to administer the exemption programs contained in the substitute. In addition, the proposed second substitute adds a new exemption program for landlords in geographic areas where a declared emergency contributes to cost increases beyond inflation. That would increase Commerce's administrative costs by an indeterminate amount. The proposed second substitute also allows Commerce to set a fee for filing for the hardship exemption created in the bill. The amount of the fee is not set in statute, and therefore any potential revenues are indeterminate. In addition, the creation of these exemption programs may drive legal services costs for commerce, as if a landlord were to contest the denial of an application for an exemption, those costs would be in the tens of thousands per biennium. And finally, I'll note that under the proposed second substitute, unlike substitute 1389, the exemption programs do not take effect until April 1st, 2024. However, Commerce would likely still incur rulemaking and other administrative costs throughout fiscal year 24, so the fiscal impact should remain substantively similar, and that concludes our remarks.
Excellent. Thank you both very much. Any questions for Ms. Vazig or Ms. Van Horn? No questions. Thank you. And we'll now go to public testimony. Representative Gregerson?
Yes, thank you. Okay, so we're going to bring forward Mike Enos, Mike Hoover, and Christy Mays. And then online, let's go ahead and bring in Jeff Pack, Patricia Hundermis, Corey Brewer, and Barbara Kordecki.
Hello and welcome. Please begin whenever you're ready.
Hey, thank you. I think we lost a mic somewhere in here. I had to make it. I mean,
That's awful. You have not gotten any better since you left our service.
But I am Mike Hoover here on behalf of Détente Management, which owns and operates communities throughout our state. And I'm speaking kind of from that perspective, the manufactured housing perspective, which I think is unique because there are a number of provisions already in current law that are not necessarily applicable to the entire rental market. For example, we already have a 1 year, you can only raise rent once a year. We already have notice provisions. And we function sort of like a little community. We have a network of roads, infrastructure, that sort of thing. And one of our concerns is in the way that this is written, it may be possible that we have a situation where we are obligated to repair or maintain something, but we could not recoup the actual costs of that. So it could be a conflict with the law and the lease in that sense. One of the things I would like to mention is the way, this is not a criticism of the sponsors or the drafters, this is a very thoughtful bill, but we often in Olympia, we layer things. We see a problem, we come up with a solution, we come back a year later, we add something else, and sometimes we don't even know what we've done or what's working. Right now, we already have a dispute resolution process that involves the Attorney General. Now we're going to add the consumer protection, and now we're going to add the AG in again. It can get very confusing, and all of this is over and above existing contract law. So there's a lot going on here, and I would just like to see it harmonized and made to work with existing law. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hoover. Rep. Gregerson?
Thank you. Christy.
Okay. Good evening, Chair and members of the committee. I'm Christy Mays. I'm a small housing provider here today in opposition of 1398. One can't help but see and hear the headlines of late about the rising cost of housing and rents, along with every other good and service. As a small housing provider, I'm very sympathetic to what that translates into for our residents, but also for our businesses as well, because our costs rise for just day-to-day routine maintenance, not to mention the larger investments that we have to make to maintain our communities so they are viable well into the future. While well-intended, rent control has failed in every other market where it's been implemented, and it fails because it doesn't do anything to add housing stock to the marketplace, and it's really a matter of supply and demand. I'm not sure how we can justify creating policy that benefits those who are also affluent and financially stable while giving consideration to those who are living on the edge. Rents are rising at the rate that they are because there's just simply not enough housing in the marketplace, and the cost that it takes to provide housing is growing exponentially. I'd also like to mention that you might start seeing articles in the near future about declining rent growth because the real estate market is cyclical, and this is just part of that cyclical process. I see I'm out of time, but please keep an eye out for bills this session that are favorable to creating more housing for Washingtonians. Thank you.
Ms. Mays, Rep. Gregerson?
Thank you. I think the other mic showed up.
Yeah, thank you. Mr. Chair, members of the committee, I'm Mike Ennis here on behalf of the Association of Washington Business. We are opposed to this bill. This bill would limit the ability of landlords to raise rents, thus creating a form of rent control. We oppose the concept of rent control because of its negative impacts on housing stability, housing affordability, and the overall economy. We're also concerned about the sizable fiscal impact that would cost the state about $3.5 million a biennium once the program is up and running. The housing crisis in Washington is a result of a combination of factors, and the most important of which is lack of supply. Artificially capping rent increases reduces investments in housing creation, further restricting the supply and leading to a wider gap in affordability. Rental housing is an economics jobs driver and employs more than 6,000 Washingtonians statewide. Landlords are housing providers, and we should be finding ways to encourage their growth, not restricting it. For these reasons, we ask you to reject the bill. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's go ahead and go to those choosing to testify. We'll start with Jeff, but before we do that, can we bring forward Walter Jorgensen, Michael Gustafsson, and Thomas Bitta for in person? And Jeff, when you're ready.
My name is Jeff Pack, and I'm in opposition to this bill. As a landlord, here you are once again telling me what I can and can't do with my own property. Now are you going to tell me how much I can raise my rates when I need to raise them to cover skyrocketing costs? Then you're going to tell me that if I have to raise it higher than you think I should, I have to go through this arduous process that I'm sure is biased against me as well. It's my property, not yours. Then you are tying increases into CPI or a max of 7%. You don't even need to be an economist to know how bogus CPI is relative to real inflation. Do you folks never even buy anything? Because that's the only way I can see how you remotely propose such an incredibly stupid idea. In the end, there are landlords that abuse rental increases, sure, but it is their property to do so, not yours. As a consumer, you are fine to go someplace else. We don't live in a socialist society. We live in one based off of capitalism. I don't know what world you live in, except it's not reality. That's all.
Thank you, Mr. Pack. Representative Gregerson.
Thank you. Patricia.
Hello and welcome.
Yes, good evening, Chair and esteemed members of the committee. My name is Patricia, and I represent Yakima Valley Landlords Association with over 600, basically mom and pop landlords in Central Washington. I'm going to talk about the considerations for the fiscal impact of this bill. We're opposing it. We continue to burden the Department of Commerce with projects. And here is yet another new program for them. When we have programs that are unfunded, like the Landlord Mitigation Fund, we should take care of programs the department already has on the books. Is there not a better way to spend several $1 million, perhaps on those who need housing? Currently, the price is over $2 million in the first 2 fiscal years and over $3 million in the second. That's a lot of money. And in regards to the banking part of this law, I'm wondering if there is any analysis that's been done that on the basis that 5 staff members would be able to maintain data for the.
Summarize, Patricia?
I'm getting there. Thank you. How possible could 5 staff members be able to maintain the data on the entire landlord population of rent increases in the state of Washington? And one last thing is this bill exempts the most expensive properties that are out there. Those are the new properties that are getting built 1 through 10 or 1 through 12 years.
Thank you so much.
I think that's wrong. Thank you so much for your patience.
Representative Gregerson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Before Corey speaks, we're still trying to get Barbara Karduki to go ahead and accept your invite. And Corey, when you're ready.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for your time this evening. What a meeting this has been. Earning your paychecks tonight. I'm a property manager representing over 1,500
Could you state your name for the record, please?
Oh, yes, Corey Brewer, property manager representing over 1,500 small mom and pop housing providers throughout the greater Seattle area mostly. The blanket policy that is rent control is just not the type of approach that needs to be taken when we're talking about housing affordability issues. Should definitely be focusing more on targeted relief for people with demonstrable financial hardships in the form of housing vouchers, I think is probably a good way to go. With the limited time here, I'll just summarize. I sent in very detailed written commentary a case study on just one of our clients who has been providing a home in Kirkland for the last 6 years. Annual rent increases on that property have averaged 1.4% per year, and they're currently about 11% under what I would call prevailing market rates. They were in conversation with us about offering their tenant another renewal, but on January 20th, after reading a summary of this bill, they emailed to let us know that they would no longer like us to renew their tenant's lease. They would rather sell the home this spring when the lease is up. And if you look at what it's going to cost someone to purchase that house, yeah, it costs about twice as much per month after a 6-figure down payment, not including property tax, for someone to afford that home as a buyer as opposed to a renter. So we're pushing the affordable housing out just with the threat of this type of legislation.
Thank you, Mr. Brewer. Representative Gregerson?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to make sure that folks that are here signed up to testify in person, we called you forward, but I haven't seen you. Walter Jorgensen, Michael Gustafsson, and Thomas Bita. Okay, let's go ahead then, and Barbara has not moved over, Mr. Chair, so I'm going to call in Audrey Riddle, Greg Kurbana, Mark Harmsworth, Tim Eyman, and Larry Jensen. And Audrey, when you're ready. I'll read them slower. Okay, here's Audrey. Audrey, when you're ready.
Thank you, Chair Ormsby and members of the committee. I'm Audrey Riddle from Goodman Real Estate. GRE is an owner, property manager, and developer of rental housing since 1991, based in Seattle. We provide rental housing for over 28,000 Washingtonians in our 60 apartment communities in Pierce, King, Snohomish, and Kitsap counties. Also, we have more than 1,200 units in development to be delivered over the next 3 years. I'm here today to ask you to vote no on House Bill 1389 due to the negative fiscal impact it will have on Washington State. A study by the National Apartment Association found that in Seattle alone, with a modeling of a 7% cap on rent increases, this would create a $5.5 million loss annually in property tax revenue. Adding into the fiscal note on the bill, that estimate would exceed $8 million. As a note, the modeling impacts of rent control report will be emailed to each of you. Across our portfolio in Washington State, the past 3 years, GRE has seen our taxes, insurance, and utilities increase 51%. This bill does not account for those increases of required expenses to maintain rental housing. Thank you for your service and consideration.
Thank you, Ms. Riddle. Rep. Gregerson?
Thank you. Greg, when you're ready.
Good afternoon, Chair Ormsby and members of the committee. My name is Greg Serbana, and I'm here today on behalf of Weidnar Apartment Homes, and I'm testifying in opposition to 1389. I'd like to share with you a real-life example based on Weidnar's experience with a recently enacted rent control ordinance in St. Paul, Minnesota, that resulted in building permits plummeting by 80% and the pausing or outright cancellation of 3,300 rental units that were scheduled to be constructed. New construction projects are economically infeasible under rent control ordinances. And as a result, Weidnar stopped our work on 2,000 new apartments we had planned to build there. Our private investment would have supported the creation of more than 760 units of affordable housing, with half of them dedicated to residents at the 30% AMI level and the rest at 50% AMI. A recent study by 2 professors at the University of Southern California found that rent control caused property values in that case to fall by 7%, for an aggregate loss of $1.6 billion. And as it relates to the purported goals of seeking equity, they found that the tenants who gained the most from rent control had higher incomes and they were more likely to be white, while the owners who lost the most had lower incomes and were more likely to be minorities. And thus, they concluded that the impacts of the law was actually the opposite of its intention.
Mr. Sabana?
Thank you.
Thank you.
And I ask for you to reject the bill.
Thank you. Representative Gregerson?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mark?
Good afternoon, Chair Ormsby, Ranking Member Stokesbury. I'm here today for the record. My name is Mark Harmsworth. I'm the Small Business Director of the Washington Policy Center, and I'm signing in today opposed to House Bill 1389. We're living in a post-pandemic rental market where property owners have been hit hard with delayed rents, no rents, and even an eviction moratorium. House Bill 1389 would restrict the ability for property owner to recover lost income and make needed improvements. Things like paint, carpet, kitchen appliances, cleanups after maybe a bad tenant. You might even see a death or a murder, domestic violence, hoarding, or other property damage made to these units. And so they're going to have to pay for it. They've got no way under this bill to better repair that. Even if the property owner decides to sell the property to another owner, the restrictions in this policy would prevent the new owner from then recouping the money from maybe doing repairs or working on the property. So as an investor, why would you even invest in a property if that's the case? It's going to reduce rental markets, as we heard earlier. People will walk away from their rental properties and convert them to houses. The costs incurred on by this bill and property owners will force 12-month fixed leases. If you want to reduce rents in Washington, reform the Growth Management Act, look at the urban growth areas, and reduce the municipal targets set by the Puget Sound Regional Council. More buildable land means more homes. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Harmsworth. Representative Gregerson?
Yes, thank you. Before we go to Tim, let's go ahead and bring into the Zoom room Councilmember Navarra Carr, Brianna Vasquez, and Craig Peck. And Tim, when you're ready.
Well, thank you very much. My name is Tim Eyman from Bellevue, and it's like you're with the tug of war with yourselves. You realize there's a housing crisis, yet you're going to end up going in the exact opposite direction and drive people away that are actually renting houses, renting multifamily homes to people who need them. It's like a total tug of war, but it's math. All you're doing is just adding it up and just going, well, there's more renters than there are landlords. Let's screw the landlords and let's just leave the renters and maybe even mail the renters a check. It literally doesn't make any sense. The laws of economics apply to rent, to housing, to everything. You can't just suspend the law of economics just because there's more renters than there are landlords. The landlords own their property. The renters can leave anytime they want to. If they don't want to stay there anymore, they can leave. It is a reasonably free country where we still have these rights, but boy, this bill takes a whole lot of them away.
Thank you, Mr. Eyman. Representative Gregerson?
Thank you. Larry?
There, Mr. Jensen.
Yes, can you hear me or see me?
We cannot see you yet, but we can hear you.
Okay. I don't know how to.
You go ahead, Mr. Jensen. We'd love to see you, but
there we go.
Okay. Welcome.
Okay. My name is Larry Jensen. I'm from Skagit County, and I started acquiring rentals when I was young. I'm 69 years old now, and I knew I wouldn't have a pension. And so my plan was to buy rentals. Basically, they were distressed properties, and I fixed them up over my lifetime with the idea that I was going to have a retirement income from these rentals. And then a couple of years ago, they started out, and they actually changed the number of days. It was a 3-day pay or vacate. Then it became 14 days. And I questioned my representative. I said, well, gosh, who else has to provide free services or free goods to somebody if they're not paying the bill? But that didn't matter. And I still have to provide more time to evict somebody if there's a problem. And generally, I don't have a problem. I have good renters. But then the pandemic came. And then again, I couldn't evict somebody. And I had people who maybe were selling drugs in the complex or in one of my units. I couldn't get them out because of the pandemic. No one would help me. I couldn't get an attorney to help me. And then I had a unit that burnt down. And when I went to rebuild it, I basically had to have a salmon study, and I'm miles away from the river or the water. And I had to build a sidewalk to nowhere. And when someone basically wanted to walk down the sidewalk, they had to walk out into traffic to get back onto the next sidewalk.
Could you please summarize, Mr.
I sure
Jensen?
will. Thank you. The point is my costs are increasing, the fuel and a number of other costs. And this bill discourages me from staying in business, and I'm hoping that you will let me run my property and take care of my tenants as I see fit. Thank you very much.
Mr. Jensen. Representative Gregerson?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Councilmember Carr?
Good evening. My name is Navarra Carr, and I'm a city council member representing the city of Port Angeles. Our City Council unanimously supports this policy and encourages your support as well. Tenants in our region are suffering, and we are prohibited from protecting our residents from extreme rent increases. In our rural community, the majority of residents are housing cost burdened. I'm a renter, and even elected officials like myself are not insulated from unaffordable rent increases. Like many residents, I too received a rent increase this year and am now paying a majority of my income to housing costs. I'm also on the board of the North Olympic Development Council and hear firsthand that businesses are unable to recruit workers due to the unstable rent environment. Rent stabilization is a crucial piece of the housing solution. With other bills addressing the supply and supportive services, passage of this bill will provide the stabilization that our region desperately needs. The City of Port Angeles urges you to please pass this bill this year. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Carr. Representative Gregerson?
Thank you. Before we go to Brianna, can we also move Stacy Valenzuela over from the Zoom room? And Brianna, when you're ready.
My name is Brianna Vasquez, and I'm pro Senate Bill 1389. I'm a single mother and resident of Renton. In 2022, I was paying $2,049 and received a notice from Greystar Property Management advising me of a 15% rent increase. If I wanted to go month to month, it would have been 112% more. I had to move, and the replacement unit that I moved to requested $6,000 for first, last, and deposit. I drained my savings and went further into debt. Even though I am not low income, this was an exceptional hardship for me. If the bill was in place at the time, I would have been able to have stable housing for my family. I have to move again, but rent options are scarce in my area. For example, my old unit is now going for $2,929 when I checked today. I am in support of reforms because these increases are unscrupulous, untenable, and should be illegal. Greystar is now facing a lawsuit for allegedly inflating prices, and I am a real-life consequence of their actions.
Thank you, Ms. Vasquez. Representative Gregerson?
Thank you. Craig?
I'm Craig Peck, a landlord with 2 rentals, testifying for this compromise bill. Rent stabilization is not rent control. Investors will still control rents by setting them as they wish before a renter moves in and again when they move out. A COLA increase while a renter occupies a unit is sufficient because our main cost, a mortgage, is fixed. The other costs are a small part of rent. Colossal rents are hurting most Washington businesses. Our labor shortage is one of the worst in the nation due to high rents. Without enough employees, businesses cut operations and expansion. And the 40% of Washingtonians who rent have far less to spend. Each $200 rent increase can mean a $2,400 yearly loss of sales for restaurants, stores, and services. And that also means a massive loss in sales tax collections to fund our public budgets. Please do the math. Washington's economy and businesses should not have to suffer for the benefit of the rental property industry. Please support this pro-business bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Peck. Representative Gregerson?
Thank you. Stacy?
Stacy Valenzuela, District 1. The manufactured home communities are such valuable resources of extremely and very low, unsubsidized, affordable housing for our city's most vulnerable, seniors, veterans, disabled, low income, working and non-working residents. Several thousands residents will be displaced if the rent increases continue, becoming homeless, living in encampments, cars, couch surfing. The options for a manufactured homeowner will be forced to file for housing assistance, attempt to quickly sell their home, or get a 3 or 4 year wait list for affordable housing, or wait to be forced out with eviction. We have communities where several tenants were priced out during COVID, some that have left their homes or lived in their homes for 15 to 30 years. abandoned their homes, some were confiscated. They only had 30 days to sign a new lease and 90 days for the rent increase to be effective. Just before the year's end, the 55-plus park that I reside in for the last 6 years, Lakewood Villa in Kenmore, was sold. Then came the 90-day notice of 17 to 30% rent increases. The management raised these rents on several tenants with incomes of $900 to $1,200 a month. The standard we keep hearing is that no one should have to spend more than 30% on housing. Yet the most vulnerable are charged 80 to 100%.
Comments, Ms. Valenzuela?
Vote to adopt Bill 1389 to limit rent increases and give tenant enforcement through the AG. Tenants with low and very low income need more time to apply for other options. We need your help and support to adopt these protections with rent stabilization. We need to build more affordable housing while keeping.
Thank you so much, Ms. Valenzuela.
Thank you.
Representative Gregerson?
That is it for the testifiers.
So that